What is good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another SK Wealth Academy podcast number 150. Now, before I get started, let me just make a couple extremely important public service announcements. Number one, because I feel like my time is limited on the YouTube platform as a whole bunch of people are getting deplatformed. Always remember, you can always find me at patreon.com/skwealthacademy if I disappear from YouTube. Again, patreon.com/skwealthacademy. I will put all of these links in the show notes below, so please do write them down, make a note so you know where you can continue to follow me if I am off of YouTube by involuntarily mandate. So I will also continue to upload my podcast, downloadable MP3 file on skwealthacademy.podbean.com, on Spotify, and on iTunes coming in about a week. So they're available now on Spotify and Podbean, iTunes in about a week. And all those three platforms are completely free. So I have not made my podcast pay. I'm not charging any money to download my podcast on any of those platforms. So even if I'm deplatformed here on YouTube, you can find them on all three of those platforms absolutely free. And then lastly, I want to make the very quick announcement that I only have 4 weeks left in my GoFundMe campaign to help me launch my 22 online course, SK Wealth Academy, which I guarantee you will provide far more value than any university or college curriculum in the entire world, and also far more value and far more applicability than any MBA curriculum in the world. And because I attended an Ivy League school and graduated from, I graduated Ivy League University. I also attended a top 15 MBA program, and my response to the low utility of that education, and actually received 2 master's degrees, not just one, all that low utility education was to spend 10 years creating SK Wealth Academy. So thank you to all the generous and beautiful souls out there that have already donated. There's only 4 weeks left for me to reach my goal. Maybe about a seventh of the way there, so I still have a long way to go. If you want to help me out, just go to gofundme.com/F like fight /SK Wealth Academy. All the links will be below. Okay, so let's get started. Now today, this podcast, I'm going to talk about the problem with science and all the falsehoods that are promoted with certain scientific paradigms. So it's more or less actually a problem with the scientific paradigms that are promoted by the ruling class. Not necessarily a fault with science, but how we are taught to think about science in absolutes. And that is actually one of the problems that has caused all of the false beliefs about the Corona beer hysteria. Now, you all know what I'm referencing, but I found that a lot of my videos are being shadow banned when I reference the exact name, so you all know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to refer to it as Corona beer hysteria in this podcast to see if it matters, because every time I speak truth about that and use the proper names, people tell me, oh, you're going to get this podcast is going to get shadow banned because it's going to go through the audio algorithms of various social media platforms, and you are not going to reach the amount of people that you want to reach. And sure enough, when specifically speaking about the Corona beer hysteria, that I have always lost subscribers. So my subscriber count has always gone down when I've spoken about this subject in particular. But let's move on. So just so you know now, whenever I say Corona beer hysteria, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the authority of science as a field of absolutes has been misappropriated, as I started this podcast, by the ruling class to trick us all into believing that their mandates are necessary when it comes to certain scientific mandates that they promote as science, which indeed is actually not science, when the exact opposite is true. So let me start off this explanation with an anecdotal point that will explain how the false belief of science as a field of absolutes has led to the ruling class's ease in which they've manipulated billions of us around the world, not only to obey their mandates by just using science as the crux. Science says this is necessary. And these mandates are actually against our own best interests. They've convinced billions of us to follow mandates like sheep, like non-thinking pods, to obey mandates that work against our own best interests. But not only that, they've also convinced millions of people around the world to police their neighbors and to enforce these mandates that are against our own best interests, because they're being sold to us as being in our own best interests, when in reality, like I said, the exact opposite is true. Now, US President Ronald Reagan once truthfully stated, quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help," end quote. Think about this for a second. A lot of people have thought in the past that conspiracy theorists spread this quote and just made it up, and that it was a fake quote. And while it's true that the majority of quotes you hear online attributed to famous people are not accurate, there's so many quotes I've heard about the financial industry. Henry Ford said this about central banking. Thomas Jefferson said this. It's not true when you really look it up. There's no attribution. And those quotes you hear are an amalgamation of other quotes that you can find from attributable sources. But those quotes that are most famous, the majority of them are not true. But this one is accurate because, and it was spoken by US President on August 12th in 1986, and I'll put the link in the show notes below to the source speech that has actually been archived at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, so you can go verify. And this neatly sums up the problem with billions of non-thinking pods to global economic lockdowns that are ongoing right now. And it speaks to the fact that we can be so easily tricked into blind compliance to political mandates and unconstitutional lockdown mandates under the very false premise that they are being executed to help us. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. But remember, the devil and these politicians that have mandated these lockdowns are all devils in some aspect of that word, never comes at us with the truth. This is exactly how billionaire Bill Gates has also fooled billions by pretending he's using his billions to perform charity from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, charitable foundation, right? And also, this has always been the MO of the rich and the wicked. The Rockefellers established the General Board of Education and has outspent back in the day the entire US government in formulating the institutional education system to ensure that they would exert the most influence over the development of young minds within the US education system that was eventually exported to the rest of the world under the guise, again, he said, I'm doing this out of the charity of my heart to help you. When in reality, what he ensured, and the industrialists that worked along with him ensured, was that they would systemically strip scientific thinking and scientific application out of the scientific subjects being taught in school, and stripped critical thinking development out of schools to ensure that generations to come would be increasingly easier to control and to manipulate. And perhaps the one positive thing that's come out of the corona beer hysteria has been that it's been reported that there's been a significant downturn in the enrollment in institutional academia, excuse me, around the world. So that is very positive, because if people are seeking out alternative forms of education, then maybe perhaps the critical thinking skills will be developed to a much higher degree than is possible even by attending Oxford or Harvard or Princeton or Yale or my alma mater, University of Pennsylvania. So Excuse me. One thing I want to say is I'm sorry on the audio files. Sorry for this cough because they're probably loud. I just had something in my throat, so I apologize for that. But I also apologize if you hear a howling thing in the background because I'm going through what's been, I kid you not, a week and a half long period of monsoon season here, torrential downpours and howling winds, almost 24 hours a day. I kid you not, all day, all night. So maybe we are reaching Armageddon in the end of the world if this 10 days of constant torrential downpour and howling winds extends to 40 days. Maybe we're here. But let's continue. So I want to read you a quick heartbreaking comment I saw on a YouTube music channel that was playing Pink Floyd's Echoes in the background as I was researching this podcast. And a woman that lives in Mexico wrote an ode to her father online on the Pink Floyd music upload that I was listening to in response to the French government banning her from returning home to Lyon, France to attend her father's funeral, who had just passed away. And by the way, this is not an isolated case. There are literally millions of people worldwide, not just myself, that have been locked down for more than 200 days now, unable to return home because of the quote-unquote help politicians around the world have offered us to quote-unquote keep us safe during the corona beer hysteria. So she wrote heartbreakingly, quote, "My father died 2 weeks ago. I'm in Mexico and he lived in Lyon, France. Could not go to his funeral. Effing virus." And Echoes, or rather the whole album Metal, was the first vinyl my father bought me. He used to tell me that certain kinds of music like Pink Floyd could help soothe the soul. Well, Papa, thank you. I'm listening to Echoes, thinking of you and how you introduced me to these healing, traveling sounds. Yes, Echoes takes me right there somewhere where you are now. Magic. End quote. So I would say the only thing she got wrong in her heartfelt tribute to her father was her statement of effing virus. Because corona beer hysteria did not prevent her from traveling home to attend her father's funeral. Since the real danger of corona hysteria is not any greater or barely greater than the regular flu, she could have been easily able to travel home with no risk to herself or presenting no risk to anyone else on her flight had politicians not intervened to quote unquote help us. She really should have written instead of effing virus, effing devil politicians, and then her tribute would have been perfect. So they say the greatest trick the devil played on us was convincing us he does not exist. I don't believe that's true. The greatest trick the devil played on us was turning our hearts into stone. I really believe that if we still cared about one another, we would view the plight of Beatrice. Beatrice was her name that wrote that heartfelt tribute to her father. So we would view the plight of Beatrice in Mexico, unable to fly home to Lyon to attend her father's funeral and say her final goodbyes, as our own plight, if we were still human. But too many of us that have not only been minimally adversely affected by these politically motivated lockdowns are fine with them and are actually supporting them. Not only unwilling to speak out about that, but supporting them. Because of this, it's that support and that lack of concern and lack of humanity and compassion to all the Beatrice of the world. And it's because the devil has tricked us into believing now that we should not have compassion for the plight of others. If we're not being personally affected, if we remain uninfected, that's the greatest trick the devil has played on all of us. Because the problem is, as we already know from numerous historical examples of systemic totalitarian regimes, when they're being implemented, if we don't act out simply because we and our family are not being directly negatively impacted, we know from history that allows greater and greater totalitarian regimes or totalitarian mandates to be implemented and more restrictive mandates until all our liberties are stripped away. So the time to act has to be now, has to be actually 6 months ago from people that are not acting and still supporting what is going on. And so Every segment of a society that remains apathetic to such violations of human rights simply because it does not affect them enables and invites greater and greater violations of human rights to take place. And when they are finally moved to act out against them because the next level of human rights violations has finally crept upon their doorstep, by that time and point, it is far too late to do anything to stop these violations, because the time to act is when they are affecting others and not you. So that's why unity and strength in numbers can defeat powerful, cowardly enemies. Because cowardly people can be very powerful. Spineless people can be very powerful. Immoral people can be very powerful. But guess what? Even when people are afraid, there is strength in numbers. There is strength in unity that can defeat these powerful cowards. So we have to understand that the time to act is now. The time to act was yesterday. By the time we finally decide to act, just because we or our family members are directly negatively impacted, the time to reverse the trend of totalitarianism has gone to long past us by. A society at large will have already been thinned and subjected to such attrition that when people wait far too long to act, they will find there is nobody left to stand with them in defiance and resistance and reversing the totalitarian trend. So before I move forward in this podcast, let me discuss what's wrong with discussions involving fields of science, which we must first understand in order to understand how politicians are using the premise of science to convince us to wear face masks against our own good, to shelter at home against our own good, to not work against our own good. So to begin, far too many of us blindly follow what someone placed into a position of authority mandates with zero research into the background of that person. So I literally have heard dozens of people state that whatever Dr. Fauci states, that's what I'm going to do. And again, I know that if you mention his name and go against his narrative, that your video or podcast will automatically be shadow banned by a lot of algorithms of social media. So from this point forward, I'm just going to refer to him as Dr. F, but you'll know who I'm referencing. So such blind obedience is completely unacceptable, and anyone that states this needs to research Dr. F's career and his numerous other completely faulty conclusions he's provided about other viruses. Understand that he's not in a position because he's a superior intellectual person and superior medical doctor, but he's in his position of authority as a consequence of a politically motivated agenda. If we understand that very few people in positions of authority are there because they are the smartest, best candidates for the job, but rather just there due to political agendas, and they do not have our best interests at heart, then we will stop blindly obeying their mandates and stop saying such stupid, moronic stuff as whatever Dr. F says, I'm going to do. Because we'll realize they're providing crazy mandates, and when they say it's for our own good, it's for their own good, but not for our good. So this is an incredibly important fact to understand. And what crazy stuff has Dr. F said in the past that was completely wrong, that people are just ignoring when they say, whatever Dr. F says, I'm going to do? Dr. F said when HIV came out and was an epidemic, he said he believed that casual close contact with someone else, such as handshakes and even contacting skin with an HIV infected person, may give you HIV. That's how clownish this medical doctor is, that billions of people around the world say, whatever Dr. F says, I'm going to obey. And secondly, we must realize that the science itself is not the binary model. It's not the binary model that the ruling class falsely wants us to believe. So no real scientist whose mind has not been completely polluted and compromised by the ruling class will state that science is about absolutes. as this is the paradigm that's being presented to us, especially in regard to the Corona beer hysteria. In fact, the most well-known concepts science has given us are all non-absolutes. The Big Bang, general relativity, quantum physics are just a few scientific theories that are the best explanations of concepts based upon a set of known observations and data, but yet still not absolute, as direct evidence that proves these theories are absolute are still completely lacking. For example, even though the brightest minds in the entire world still do not understand what gravity is exactly. Let me give you an anecdotal story that will illustrate exactly what's wrong with how science is presented to us today and how we think of science. And again, I'm not saying science is wrong, it's how we think of science that is wrong. And that's a very important distinction to understand. So a university engineer graduate once comically and arrogantly told me when we were discussing gravity, and I was saying, nobody knows what gravity is. He said, oh, I know exactly what gravity is. And if I didn't know what exactly gravity is, he said, it's moronic of you to say that people don't understand what gravity is. Because if I didn't understand what gravity is, in my occupation as an engineer, thousands of people would die if I did not use the law of gravity correctly in designing buildings as an engineer. So I thought to myself, oh, this ought to be good because I'm talking to the next definitive winner of the Nobel Prize in Science, because nobody knows exactly what gravity is in the entire world except this person that I'm talking to right now. So out of curiosity, I said, okay, what is gravity? He answered, gravity is 9.81 meters per squared second. And if it wasn't this, people would die from the projects that I worked on. I said, gravity is definitely not 9.81 meters per squared second. And I asked, why in the world do you believe this is the correct definition of gravity? And again, he was just combative. He said, no, you're completely wrong. Newton's law of universal gravitation stated that every particle in our universe attracts every other particle in the universe with a force that's directly proportional to the product of the masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. And on Earth, this force is 9.81 meters per squared second. So he's almost correct in stating not that the force of gravity is 9.81 meters per square second. That's wrong. But the rate of acceleration on Earth within a vacuum is 9.81 meters per square second. But actually, if it's not within a vacuum, it varies very slightly. There's variances from that 9.81 meters per square second rate of acceleration, depending upon atmospheric pressure, whether you're near sea level or near the top of Mount Everest. So again, in his arrogance, he told me I was an idiot. I had no idea what I was talking about. But in any event, as soon as I heard him mention Newton to relay his indisputable absolute definition of gravity, I knew it was because in school he learned that Newton's theory of gravity and not Albert Einstein's theory of gravity. Furthermore, I knew he was incorrectly taught that the rate of acceleration was the same thing as gravity, which it is not. Because again, no scientist today, as of the recording of this podcast on October 17th, 2020, can explain exactly what gravity is. So, since Albert Einstein in his theory of general relativity stated observations that postulated gravity was a curvature and the space-time continuum was much more compelling than gravity was a force, he proved Newton's theory of gravity as most likely wrong in the early 1900s. So this was like over 100 years ago. And in doing so, he did not disprove the rate of acceleration. Newton's, given rate of acceleration still has remained intact, and that's true. But today, as I mentioned, scientists are still trying to prove Einstein's theory of general relativity as a curvature in the space-time continuum is a correct explanation for gravity, and that it's not a force, it's a curvature. But there are still problems with Einstein's theory. So it's still being worked out today by the brightest minds in the world. What is the correct definition of gravity? But it's generally accepted in consensus among scientists that gravity is not a force. And that's been the consensus since the early 1900s. So I thought it quite funny that this young lad I was speaking to kept stating that gravity was absolute, it's indisputable, the definition of gravity, and that's a force. of the rate of acceleration. So, and he said, every engineer knows this. Every engineer who went to school knows this. And by saying this, he was basically declaring himself as more brilliant than Albert Einstein, because Albert Einstein disputed that. And he's declaring himself as more brilliant than every single scientist that's studying gravity today, the principles of gravity, and still trying to explain exactly what it is. And that's exactly the problem with how science is taught in school. Not the problem with science, but how it is taught in school. So that's taught as an absolute, and what I'm teaching you in school is an absolute. And if anybody dares to tell you you're wrong outside of the classroom, don't use your mind to think. Don't listen to this person. Just block whatever this person is telling you as far as the reason why you're wrong, and just instead hear blah, 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 blah in your mouth. So you're not going to listen to anything they say, which is how people react, and they stick to their false beliefs. Because so many things about science remain unknown and uncertain. So to say that science is a field of absolutes is completely false. But this is how it's taught in school. So the reality of science that was taught in school, if the reality of science is taught in school, that's not a field of absolutes. There are many unknowns, many presuppositions, thus the word scientific theories, right? Because if they weren't theories, without direct evidence and proof that they are true, then they'd be called scientific proofs. But if the reality of science, the correct paradigm of science was taught in school, politicians could have never sold the corona beer hysteria to us as an indisputably lethal hysteria. It's all the lie that we all need to socially stay apart, never hug anyone, never shake hands, stop working, stay at home, not travel more than 5 kilometers from your home or you're going to die, never dance again at bars, never shake anyone's hand, wear a face mask even when completely naked and having sex. They've said that, wear face masks even with your spouse when having sex. That's the most ridiculous things in the world, and dozens of other absurd mandates, and literally have hundreds of millions of people blindly comply with their orders. So science must be falsely taught as a field of absolutes in order for the ruling class to successfully implement mass global compliance to any of their mandate. Not just to these lockdown orders, but trust me, they're going to mandate far more restrictive orders are coming in next year, 2021, and they're going to get people to blindly comply to them. And I blame the faulty manner in which science is taught as being a key peg in why this is happening. So let me say that. Let me say this because this is, and stress this point because this is truly, truly important for all of us to understand. Science must be falsely taught as a field of absolutes in order for mass global compliance to be possible. Science must be falsely taught as a field of absolutes in order for mass global compliance to be possible. Because if science was not incorrectly taught and is not incorrectly taught as a field of unquestionable absolutes, but accurately taught as a dynamic field of information that's constantly shifting and changing as more and better information is gathered due to better analytical tools, more powerful analytical tools, and our information becomes more accurate about certain topics, there would have been a zero chance of global compliance to lockdown orders happening right now around the world. I'm telling you, there would have been zero chance of this happening because billions from the jump would have questioned the validity of these mandates and exposed their mandates as unlawful, unnecessary orders right away. For example, let me provide you with a few scientific theories due to advancements in diagnostic testing and observational data that was universally once believed to have been true. But now if you state such beliefs because advancements in science have long proved them to be false, people will now label you properly as a lunatic, whereas people would have labeled you back then as a lunatic for not believing in these absurd theories. So let's begin. I'll just go through a few of these. Up until the start of the 20th century, people believed that the mother's experience could imprint upon the yet undeveloped fetus in an absurd manner. For example, if a pregnant mom heard a deafening sound, even though her hearing remained fine, they would just say, oh, look, the developing fetus in the womb is so vulnerable. It's not fully developed adult yet. So a deafening sound that's not harmful to the mother could actually cause deafness in the yet to be born developing fetus. They actually believe that was true. And it was a theory called maternal impression. And if you, if you disputed them, people would have thought you were crazy. Before the invention of powerful microscopes, you're just going to laugh and think of some of these theories I'm reviewing as comical. But the majority, or if it was a majority, a great amount of people believe them and would have been rabid in their defense against them and called you an idiot for not believing them. So again, before the invention of powerful microscopes, scientists also widely believed that an egg or sperm contained a microscopic human being that just grew incrementally bigger in the womb for 9 months. So they didn't understand the process of human development at all. And scientists also widely believed before the 18th century that a tiny worm that had burrowed into the root of a tooth was the cause of all toothaches. And then people would feel pain when the worm was moving around in the tooth, but then the pain would disappear when the worm stopped moving. And scientists from different nations even argued over the shape of this worm. With some scientists say the worm was eel-shaped, with other scientists say, no, that worm that causes toothaches is in the shape of a maggot. And another one, quite curiously, that was among the most widely believed absurd scientific fallacies throughout history involves the spread of viruses and bacterial infections. But I'm going to hold off until part 2 of this particular podcast to review that one. So I'm going to wrap this up, put them in more bite-sized chunks of about half an hour for you to listen to. And before I go, remember there's always links to references, all the references that can be found in the show notes. And also, please do note k.im, skwealthacademy.podbean.com, patreon.com/skwealthacademy. There's 3 venues you will always be able to find my information if it gets completely banned from the platform that you're listening to right now. And let me explain again before I go what benefits you will receive if you become an SK Wealth Academy patron at the $5 a month level or higher, because just remember, all this content I've been uploading for more than 15 years for absolutely free. It could not be possible without the generous, beautiful contributions of my patrons. It's not like I'm making $50,000 a month from my patrons like some people out there, because some people are making $50,000 a month. I'm just making enough money basically to cover the cost of running all the platforms and publishing all my material from my contributions. And even my last channel on YouTube, just SK Wealth Academy, even though I had more than 14 million views from my video uploads, I didn't make any more money from you. You would think, oh, you had 14 million views, you must have made a lot of money. You know how much money I made from that? I made about enough money to buy a couple good bottles of wine. Because every single one of my videos were completely demonetized the very second I uploaded them. So I didn't make any money on that. So this is just to keep supporting my content, because obviously I can't spend like 20 hours a week of my life without earning any kind of money to support me. So if you would like to support me as a patron, I'm just going to review the benefits. So you will get 2 long format, meaning 40-minute to 70 or 80-minute podcasts, audio podcasts every single month, absolutely free. And in those 2 podcasts, I cover 2 different topics. The first podcast I release for patrons only covers all the knowledge I've gained over my lifetime, and I felt like I've lived 3 lifetimes already, as far as how to survive, how to improve your quality of life, education, critical thinking skills. So basically, it's a podcast about hacking life, how to create a better life for yourself. And the second one just has to do with financial topics. So gold and silver price predictions, what are the best assets to own when the next financial Armageddon period we will experience, which is coming very, very shortly, the same one we received back in 2008, but only multiplied 2 or 3 times to that level. Certain assets you should be involved in. I actually give investment strategies as well. I'm not an investment advisor, so I say you should be well versed in the types of strategies I'm discussing with my patrons in order to take advantage of them. But let me just tell you, a lot of my strategies have returned triple-digit yields, especially my option straight trading strategies. At least well over a dozen, and just in the past 18 months, have returned very high double-digit to high triple-digit returns. And usually these option trading strategies are just for a couple days to sometimes even just one day, trade it out the very next day, but usually a couple days to a couple weeks. So they're very quick, fast, hard-hitting strategies. So you receive that as well as those that don't, because those types of strategies you feel too risky, and they're never really risky if you understand what you're doing, because there are ways to limit your downside risk as an experienced options trader. But if you don't know, then it becomes very risky. So I also discussed various assets just to go long in. And there are certain assets actually that were more than 1,000% return, more than 10 times profit, that were just buying the stock. So these are the benefits my patrons receive, as well as updates every single week on gold and silver prices. For example, the week that ended October 16th, I told my patrons, I said, I highly, highly doubt gold futures are going to close New York above $1,900. And I was just barely right. But, there are 2 instances that gold went up to $1,911 and $1,912. So 2 instances that week after I said that gold will close below $1,900. And in both those instances, having that knowledge would have provided extremely useful, especially to gold traders. And it ended up closing, I believe, 70 cents below that mark. So, okay, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for watching. Please do. Also, one way you can completely help me out is by liking this on whatever platform you're listening, by rating it on whatever platform you're listening, and by sharing and spreading this message with everyone that you feel would benefit and perhaps just would benefit from the type of information in this particular podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Always remain intensely curious, and more importantly, always remain immensely courageous. Stand with one another in love and compassion. Take care.